It's time for another season of the Palmetto Porch, an original podcast from Discover South Carolina. I'm Devin Whitmire. Join me as I get to the heart of what makes South Carolina such a great place to visit by speaking to the locals who make it so special. Premiering December 5th, find the Palmetto Porch wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information about our show, visit scpalmettoporch.com.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'd like to thank you for joining today's ADHD Experts presentation titled New Year, New Strategies, Helping Students with ADHD Plan, Persist, and Achieve Their Goals. Leading today's presentation is Dolin. Anne is the president and founder of Educational Connections, a company that specializes in helping students with ADHD and executive function issues to build confidence through virtual one-to-one sessions. Anne is a former public school teacher who holds a bachelor's degree in child psychology and a master's degree in special education from Boston College. She has spent more than 25 years in education, teaching and tutoring students from kindergarten to college. She founded Educational Connections in 1998. Her team now includes 125 highly credentialed and caring subject tutors, test prep tutors, and executive function coaches. In today's webinar, Anne will share her insights and strategies for turning a student's intentions into actions. We'll talk about how to build routines and strong study habits and many other essential life and learning skills. Let's begin today's webinar with a poll question for our live audience. When working toward a goal, where does your child need the most support? Please select your answer and comment in the text box under the video player if you'd like to tell us more. You'll see the poll results when you submit your response, and we'll touch on them again at the end. So while you're doing that, I will note that you can download the slides for today's presentation by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. If you're interested in the certificate of attendance, look for instructions in the email you'll receive about an hour after we wrap up the live broadcast. And a transcript of today's event will be made available in the coming week. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 439 to access the slides, webinar replay, certificate of attendance, and the transcript. If you support the work we're doing to support the ADHD community, we encourage you to subscribe to Attitude Magazine at attitudemag.com/subscribe. And finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Play Attention. Improve executive function and self-regulation with NASA-inspired technology. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control for students with ADHD. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs are available. Call 828-676-2240 or click the link on your screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. You can visit playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Anne Dolin. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion on turning intentions into action.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here talking about new strategies in 2023, helping kids with ADHD plan, persist, and achieve their goals. As you mentioned, my name is Dolin, and for the last 25 years, my team and I have been helping kids with ADHD to do better in school. And every day, parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And sometimes they need a tutor, like in math or science or English or writing. Sometimes they need an executive function coach, and that is somebody who specializes in organization, planning, reducing procrastination. Sometimes it's a little bit of both, but what every parent or caregiver has in common is that they are stressed out when it comes to academics. And at this time of the year, they're also saying a little prayer and crossing their fingers that 2023 is going to be better than all the others. So when we think about 2023, we all have great intentions, and especially people with ADHD, both parents and kids. Here are things that kids say about the new year. Oh, Mom, I'm going to wake up and get ready for school on time this year. I promise you won't have to remind me. I'm going to turn in my assignments. You won't have to nag. I've got it under control. On the other hand, parents are saying to themselves, okay, this year I'm going to remain calm and work to communicate better with my kids. Or I'm going to criticize less and focus more on the positives. So we all have intentions for 2023. The problem is, as you mentioned in the beginning, that there's a divide between our great intentions and actions. And this is especially true of kids with ADHD when it comes to school. Well, why is that? Why do kids have these big intentions, but they can't put it into action? What is that one thing, that glitch that's getting in the way? Well, so often it's related to executive functions. And Tom Brown, he's a wonderful researcher in the field. He says that executive functions are actually based on 6 pillars. Let me explain them. We'll talk about them because then you can see why they really get into the reason people have great ideas but can't make it work. First, when it comes to school, the idea of organizing and then prioritizing. Okay, I've got these 3 assignments to do. I'm going to do this first, second, and third. And then activating, giving yourself enough oomph to get started, even if you don't want to. Focusing. Once you get started, can you focus long enough to get it done? Can you shift your attention in that time frame? Can you regulate your alertness? If you find yourself kind of losing steam, can you kick it into gear and get the work done? Are you able to manage your frustration? So I mentioned we see this especially when kids don't want to do something. And that's usually when kids become frustrated. Can you tamp that down and modulate your emotions and get everything done? Are you able to utilize your working memory? Working memory, well, it's not short term. It's not long term. It's your brain's ability to juggle and think about multiple things while you're working on a task. And it's really hard for kids with ADHD. That's why you see students have difficulty with math and written language, because both of these areas specifically require a tremendous amount of working memory. And then lastly, and this is the hardest one, it's your ability to monitor your behavior. So if you should be working on your history notes, and before you know it, you've been watching YouTube videos for an hour, can you say to yourself, this isn't a good use of time. Let me self-correct and work on that assignment again. That's your ability to monitor. So all these things are super important for school success, yet they also get in the way of getting things done despite good intentions. So you might think, okay, what's the difference between this and ADHD? Well, here's the thing. Everybody with ADHD has weak executive function skills. But not everybody with the weak executive function skills meets the clinical diagnosis for ADHD. To me, it doesn't matter. You may have a child in your house with a diagnosis and another one that doesn't, but still struggles with these things. There are supports that you can put in place that makes life easier for all your children and even for yourself. And so, as I mentioned, there's a disconnect sometimes between your intention and your action. there's also a disconnect between what a parent wants their child to be able to do and then what the child is willing to do. Let me explain. So I mentioned that parents call our office every day. They want to talk about their kids. They want to get help for their kids. And last week I had this mom call, and she was at her wit's end with her son, David, a 15-year-old freshman with ADHD. And she said that David had missed over a week of school because he was homesick with COVID. And when he went back, he had all these assignments he had to do. And instead of, like most kids, getting to work, he took the opposite approach. He kind of backed away. He avoided. He kind of froze. He didn't do the work. And she was worried. So we were talking and she said, this is what's going on with David. Oh, and by the way, he doesn't have a system for recording his assignments. He doesn't always know what to do. Oh my gosh. And he's so disorganized. She had this long list of things she wanted him to improve upon. Now, that's great. But here's David. He may not buy into that. You may have experienced this with your own kids. And what I said to her is, look, let's have, I think an executive function coach is the way to go for David. So let's get somebody in place who is a really great personality fit, but who can also figure out where David is willing to start. And so that is the key. Anytime we want to set goals or change something with our kids, we always have to figure out, what are they willing to do? Where are they willing to accept help? And that's where the stages of behavior change come in. I think this is so interesting when it comes to understanding ADHD behavior. Anytime somebody wants to change a behavior, or maybe they're not sure if they want to change the behavior, there's somewhere in the ladder in the stages of behavior change. So let's dissect it. At the bottom of the ladder, this is the contemplation stage. And this is where the student says, you know what, I don't have a problem. Maybe you have the problem, but not me. No way, I can't and I won't change. The next step is getting a little better, contemplation, starting to think about it. Maybe someday I'll change my habits. The next stage is called preparation, getting ready for a change. Now the person kind of has a pain point. All right, starting tomorrow, I'm going to try a new way. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Then there's action. Every day, I'm building this new habit. You're actually working through the strategy. And then once you're practicing all the time, you're in this maintenance phase. I have a new way of working now. And this is when you've developed a new habit. So for David, Mom, one of the things she wanted was for him to be able to record his assignments, know what he had to do. And he was actually in the pre-contemplation stage with that skill. But he was in the preparation stage with wanting to get those overdue assignments turned in. They were really stressing him out. And so we figured, and by the way, if this is of interest to you, like it is to me, I put an ebook together all about the stages of change. And I think it's just so powerful in understanding it. It helps you see where your child is and then language you can use to help them move up the ladder. And if you'd like this, get your phone and text the number 55444 and then type in the word stages and it will come straight to your inbox. But if you live outside the US, email me because the texting number won't work. And my email is Ann, A-N-N, Dolin, D-O-L-I-N, at ectutoring.com, and I'll send it over to you. And I'll repeat that number a little bit later in my email too. So we figured out where David was by using this student self-assessment. This is one that we've developed. And seeing this trend over many, many years, like the parent has grand ambitions, but the child isn't always willing to do those things. So we took the executive function skills that are really important for school success, and we created this self-assessment that the coach does with the tutor the first time they meet. And by the way, they meet virtually, and it's all one-to-one. During COVID, virtual was not great for our kids because they're in Zoom rooms of 25 kids. But one-to-one, if you have a relationship with somebody that you're working with, it's perfectly fine. So when looking for help for your child, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Don't discount virtual. Virtual can work beautifully when it is one-to-one. So with this self-assessment, let's take a look at the first question. When it comes to recording daily assignments, here are the options for the student. I have my own way of remembering assignments. Even though I may miss some due dates, I don't need a new way of keeping track. This child is in pre-contemplation if they pick that answer. Here's the next one. I struggle with this, but I can improve on my own if I need to. They're further up the ladder. They realize there's a little bit of an issue. Here's another one. I struggle with this, and I may be interested in learning new strategies. And then this is difficult for me. I would love to learn new strategies. It helps us to understand where the student is. Let's take a look at the next one. When preparing for a test. So this one is all about how can am I motivated to learn more in less time so I get kind of more bang for my buck when studying, which is going to help grades. And so what we sometimes find, or actually not sometimes, all the time with kids is they may not be willing to do one thing, but they're willing to do another. And that was the case with David. So we started with those overdue assignments, but once we developed trust and respect, we were able to go through the side door and then tackle recording assignments, but not at first. You've got to create that relationship at first. So with your own child, if you find the more you push, the more your child pushes back, and it's just this power struggle, that may be a sign to disconnect. Maybe that's not the right thing to work on in that moment. Why is this all important? Well, kids with ADHD can often get in this doom loop. Here's what happens. They get a bad grade. They don't turn in their work. They don't do their work. And they get criticism from others, from their parent, their caregiver, a teacher. That results in lowered confidence. And when you don't have a lot of confidence, you backtrack. You've just put in less effort. And with this reduced effort, what happens? The same thing. Not turning in assignments, bad grades, and this cycle starts all over again. We do not want kids to stay in the doom loop. They've got to get out of the doom loop. So what I would recommend is that in 2023, if you see your child in the doom loop for something, I'm going to give you some strategies for breaking free, but also think, maybe this isn't the right thing to tackle. Let me look to that side door. Is there something else we can work on? So if your child's in this doom loop and you want him to get out, here's what you do. Or I'll tell you what we do. And then this can give you information for how to tackle this at home. We always think it's important to determine where that student's starting point is. As I just mentioned, we need to earn trust. And then we always use positive and encouraging language. I once saw a study that kids with ADHD receive about 80% negative feedback in school. That's a lot. No wonder kids don't love school. They don't always want to do the work. What if we shifted that narrative in those after school hours? That feeling of positivity creates motivation and a wanting to learn. And then lastly, we always want to be a good listener. And sometimes being that good listener allows kids to feel like you're on their side and you understand. So this is what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss 3 common goals parents often have for their kids. One is communication. Another is planning ahead. And the third is organization. So let's start with communication, because this one is so important when it comes to kids with ADHD. Kids with ADHD are just more resistant by nature than other students. And so we got to make sure that our communication is positive and it's going in the right direction. What does that look like? Well, when we work with kids, we always want to build that open communication, not put kids on the defensive. How do you put kids on the defensive? It's starting with did you questions. This may sound familiar. As parents, we often use them. I know I have. Did you do your homework? Did you study for that test? Did you go and see your teacher about extra help? Did you do those test corrections? But did you questions rarely work for students, whether they have ADHD or not. We'll talk a little bit later about how to change that, to switch them around to asking powerful questions. We also have found it's helpful to normalize situations. Sometimes kids think they're the only ones in this situation. They're the only person with this problem, but it's absolutely not true. So we'll say things like, you know what, you're right, this math is hard. I have another 7th grader I work with, and he's experiencing the same things. I found that this is a pretty normal feeling in middle school. We always empathize. That means that we name the feeling. Oh, I can tell you're frustrated. You're right, this is difficult. And we do this so that kids feel like they're heard. And when they feel like they're heard, they're often much more likely to be invested, to co-own the situation. So when we get started with kids, and I would recommend this for parents too, take the read the room approach. Just like if you want to talk to your child and they're in their room, you wouldn't barge in and swing the door wide open and say, hey, Johnny, we need to talk. No. Instead, you would probably knock softly and say, hey, is this a good time? So when we're about to present a strategy, we do the same thing. We'll say, hey, would you mind if I shared my thoughts on this with you? Oh, would today be an okay day for us to take a look at this? And then maybe once we've practiced the strategy, we might say, could this be a technique you would actually use? I'm also a big believer in 2 words, and they are, I've noticed. I've noticed are kind of magic words in so many situations with kids, with teachers, with our family members. Here's how I've noticed works. Let's say that your student is not doing well in school and it's only January, and you log on to their portal and say that they've got 5 overdue assignments and we're only a couple weeks into the quarter. And you say, listen, Jimmy, I can't believe this. I just logged into your portal and you've got 5 overdue assignments. What's going on? It's only January. How can you already be behind? Right away, putting kids on the defensive. But if you use those words, I've noticed, and said, hey, I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of your math work. All you're doing is observing something. You're observing what's observable. You're just noticing something. Maybe it's more specific. I've noticed equations are really hard. Tell me about it. And the reason you want to say, tell me about that, is so your child talks to you. So you have a discussion without judgment, without interrupting, and you're just listening. So they might say things like, yeah, it's so unfair. I have the worst math teacher in 9th grade. She gives more homework than any other algebra teacher. I don't know why I had to get her. It's ridiculous. And your job is to listen and to nod and to say, you know what, you're right. Math is hard. I get it. I understand. I can tell you're frustrated. So that empathy key was really important. And we found that eliminating some types of questions, asking powerful questions, and using I've noticed really gets kids to co-own situations. Here are some other conversation prompts that might help communication skills in 2023. Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. I get it. Just curious, what makes you say that? Without judgment. Maybe you're talking about a strategy. How would it work if you did that? Tell me about it. If conversation and communication is an issue and you would like to learn new strategies or have a handout of these that I just spoke about, you can get that by texting that same number, 55444, and this time the word conversation, and it will come to your inbox. And again, if you're international, just email me. I'll send it to you. Ann, A-N-N, Dolin, D-O-L-I-N, @ectutoring.com. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to find out what's the barrier to entry that your child will allow them. Like, what is the easiest thing they're going to allow you to help them with? So for many, many kids, it's planning ahead and being organized. So maybe you're tired of last minute things. It's stressing your child out. It's stressful in your whole household. And that's something that you want to tackle in 2023. Planning ahead. When we work with kids on this issue, and it's so unbelievably common to kids with a diagnosis or not, that we need to have new systems. Creating lists for kids, I found, isn't highly effective, especially for kids with ADHD. And because like with a list, you don't know, like, oh, when should I do this? How long is it going to take me? What do I do if I don't get this done? But if you use this strategy called calendaring, and that's when you actually, instead of creating a list, you put it on your calendar, it works much better. So when we help kids with this skill, we first want to figure out if they're good at estimating time or not. Most kids with ADHD are not great at estimating time. So we'll start by helping them identify what time looks like. For some kids, they don't have a great sense of time. So we'll say, when we look at what they have to do with them, we'll say, oh, is this assignment a bite? Is it a muncher? Or is it a gobbler? Well, relating food to time. So we'll say, is this a bite? And that means, is this something really easy you can get accomplished in like 5 minutes? So that might be submitting your question of the day in Google Classroom, or maybe emailing your teacher about going for extra help. If it's a muncher, this is something that takes a little bit longer, maybe like an hour or more. You've got to do those Cornell notes in your history chapter, or finish that lab report in bio. And then a gobbler is something that you work on over time. This is a complex, multi-step type of assignment, like that English Lit essay, that digital arts project. So we want kids to identify, this is a bite, this is a muncher, and this is a gobbler. And for those kids I mentioned that aren't great at estimating, we'll have them put that in a map. This is what a map looks like. It's the task. So let's say they've got to do their reading log, and then we'll say, okay, about how much time do you think it's going to take you to do that? Okay, 30 minutes, great. Let's jot that down. Now, let's look at your calendar, your after school things that you have going on. Where could that fit in? Oh, Monday, 7:15 to 8:20. Awesome. Let's put it in your calendar. Most kids are using a digital calendar. Sometimes kids will have, a traditional assignment notebook that they use, but regardless, it goes there. Sometimes we see kids that we're working on what they have to do, and it will go straight from their portal to their calendar. And on that calendar, it's not just that we'll put what's due, but if there's something big like a gobbler, we'll put that gobbler due date and then help them break it down into smaller components and put that into their calendar. But some kids can go straight to their calendar. Now, that's a little bit tricky for a parent. It's a strategy that we use. You can get similar results by doing something a little bit more simplistic at home. And I call this like a weekly preview. It can be part of a Sunday session. This is a time when you sit down with all the kids in your house, not just your kid with ADHD, but it might be where everybody gets together and you talk about the week ahead. The reason we want to preview with kids is, number one, when kids know what to expect, they have better behavior. And number two, if they do not preview, which they usually won't do on their own, they kind of show up to school on Monday and they're not sure what's going on. And they're already at a disadvantage, especially for older students. Now, for younger students, that looks like a time where you say, all right, let's look at all the things you have going on after school. This would be for the student who doesn't really get homework. And what I would recommend, this is a weekly calendar. I'm going to give you the URL to download it. I created this for you so you can use it. You can print this out, and every Sunday night you get with your kids and say, let's talk about extracurriculars. And you say, okay, what do you have Monday? Jot that down. They jot it down or you jot it down. And you're looking ahead at the week. Now, sometimes when kids have homework, you might put the big things on this calendar, like a book report, a science project, something like that. But the idea is you're helping your kids get out of the now and you're helping them to look ahead. But for older, and here's the template that I mentioned. You can download this by texting that same number, 55444, but this time type in the word calendar and it will come to your inbox. All right, so here's for older kids, what I would recommend is maybe you still do an after school calendar if they need that, but typically their issue is longer term projects and homework, those bites, munchers, and gobblers, usually the munchers and gobblers. Where are they on the calendar? So on Sunday, what we do when we see kids early in the week is we'll say, okay, let's open up your laptop and see what do you have going on. You can do the same thing. And so you might say, do you have any big tests, quizzes, anything major? What do you have due tomorrow? So it's a time when they're looking ahead. Otherwise, chances are if they don't do this, they kind of show up, as I mentioned, on Monday without a plan. And now already they're behind and nobody wants that. That doesn't feel good to anybody. When we work with kids, this is part of the session. So we always start out with the student's learning management system. It's different in every school district. It could be Canvas, it could be Schoology, it could be Google Classroom. But we'll ask the student to click on each subject so we can understand what's coming up. What do you have short-term and long-term? Okay, let's look at history. Let's look at English and so on. And then we help them to figure out what they have to do and to write it down. Either put it in their, as I mentioned, their traditional calendar, their assignment notebook, their Google Calendar, or for little kids, sometimes it's just a whiteboard. We'll also determine, once they have priorities, what is it that you have to do tonight that you really, really don't want to do? And this is the hardest thing for kids with ADHD. They avoid everything because they don't want to do something. So usually there's one thing that's kind of lingering and it doesn't make them feel good. It's heavy on their shoulders. So they might say, oh, that history paper I have to write. Okay, great. Let's take a look at that. What are the first steps? Let's work on this together so that they feel like they're getting work accomplished. And then, and this is my favorite part, at the end of the session, now that they have a plan, they've gotten some work done, we use it to reflect what worked for you in this session, but I think more importantly, to plan ahead. And this is where kids almost always get caught up. Again, they have good intentions, but they don't think about the obstacles. Oh, you have that history test on Thursday. What could get in your way? Oh, I forgot I have that lacrosse banquet on Wednesday night. Or I don't know, I've been binge watching this series on Netflix and I don't know if I can make myself study for it. All right, so then it's strategy time. Oh, totally get it. What are some strategies that can work for you? And we might talk about timers. I personally love timers. I've used timers from kids in kindergarten to kids in college. They're great for everybody, adults. This is an example, the one at the top of the time timer. I like it because it's this red floating disc. And you can use that for short periods of time. You know what? I don't want to do something. So I'm just going to set the timer for 10 minutes and work as hard as I can just for 10 minutes. But as kids get older and their executive function skills are more taxed, they have to work for longer periods of time. And that's when a different strategy can come in, not just to get you started, but to sustain effort. And in the 80s, there was an Italian researcher who wanted to see, like, what is that sweet spot for focus and motivation and getting something done? Like, how long can you sustain effort? And he looked at all types of time. Is it 10 minutes? Is it a half hour? Is it an hour? Is it 90 minutes? And what he found is there's actually this sweet spot of 25 minutes. And he coined this method, the Pomodoro method. Again, he was Italian. Pomodoro in Italian is tomato. And he used this tomato timer in his research. And so we use that for kids. And once kids learn this and they practice it over and over, they can use it on their own. But here's how it works. You say to yourself, I'm going to set the timer for 25 minutes and I'm going to work as hard as I can during this time. Now, when the timer goes off, you can take a 5-minute break. And if you're able, you can set it again for 25 minutes. What he found is that older students and adults really couldn't sustain any more than 4 Pomodoros. And for kids with ADHD, they might just be able to do 1 Pomodoro, maybe 2. But here's how it works. Pomodoro, break. Pomodoro, break. Pomodoro, break. Pomodoro. That's doing all 4. And, these executive function skills aren't just for older students. Little kids, elementary, 2nd and up, also benefit from them. And kids can learn things like getting started, even if you don't want to do it. Regulating your behavior, super common for kids to be dramatic, have meltdowns when they're little. Being organized and focusing, self-monitoring. And we have a page on our website dedicated to executive functions for younger students and a program to specifically help kids that are younger. So it's not always just older students can get help. Younger kids, once they get this foundation, it really sets the stage for them later on. All right, so we talked about communication. We talked about planning ahead. Let's talk about another really common goal. And this was actually a goal from the mom, David's mom, who called in, which was organization. Turned out with David that there were a couple things he was actually pretty motivated to do when it came to organization. And it had to do with actually his digital files. He felt like he couldn't always find things. So I love this picture because who cannot, as a parent, relate to this? I think that we probably all can. So how do you help your kids be more organized? It can start when they're young. And this could also work for older kids too. It's called a launching pad. And basically a launching pad is a bin. It's a box. It's just a place where kids put all their things that they're going to take to school in the morning. So the night before, they get everything in that launching pad, their binders, their backpacks, their musical instruments, their sports equipment, whatever. And so in the morning, they launch into a new day in an organized fashion. Ideally, the launching pad is by the door from which your child exits. But in my house, that wasn't really, it just wasn't feasible because I couldn't see, and my kids couldn't see that area from the kitchen. And our lives kind of revolved around the kitchen. And so we had this big island in the kitchen, though. And at the corners of the island, I have 2 boys. One put their things for the next day in one corner and the other in the other corner. So it's just kind of like their place to get their things in the morning. So a launching pad is really just a space that helps you to think ahead and get organized. We talked earlier about that time on Sundays to think ahead. Another part of that time could be a clean sweep. Maybe it's not planning that's the biggest issue. Perhaps it is organization. And you need your child to have a system for keeping up with organization. Because the truth is, when kids start out the year, they're super organized. But as the year goes on, they're not. But this really helps. So every week you say, all right, let's do our clean sweep. So it might be your kids are organizing their backpack, their study area. For older kids, it could be their digital files, cleaning up their inbox of email, organizing their digital calendar, or cleaning up their desktop with lots of loose documents. But what I would recommend is that it's consistent. It's every week, and if you've heard this webinar and you're thinking, there's a lot here, start with one thing, start with something easy, maybe this, and do it every week. Ideally, your role in this is to set that structure. And outside of that structure, if you find that you're still butting heads with your child, it's great to seek support. I've found a lot of value in getting help, when it's not you. Because sometimes kids will do great things with other people, not always their parent. So outside help, we'll talk about that in a second. It provides that consistency as well. And that other piece, which is accountability. What I would recommend if you decide to get outside help is to find somebody your child will work well with. And that means, kids with ADHD can be personality specific. So finding somebody that they're going to have a good rapport with is really important. And that what they're doing relates to what they're doing in school so that they feel like they're actually learning this for a reason and they're getting some of their work done. It creates more buy-in. Also, completing some of those assignments is helpful. All of these things help to increase motivation or goal achievement. So it could be you helping if you have that relationship with your child. It could be after school or at lunch with the teacher. It could be another adult. It could be a professional, which was what we do. But regardless, it should be consistent. Lastly, as we close, I want to mention that we can't always control the things our kids do. We just can't. We can control what we do, and we can control the positivity we bring to the equation. We want to preserve relationships. Parenting a kid with ADHD is hard. It's difficult. But if we can, as much as possible, keep it positive, it will preserve our relationship later on. And then lastly, one more thing, if you don't mind, before we end, I mentioned that, as kids get older, executive function demands increase a lot. When they're little, it's kind of like, put those toys away, keep that area of the living room organized. Don't forget your mitten and your gloves and brush your teeth. But as kids get older, executive functions are really taxed in academics. You've got these long-term assignments due. You've got competing demands from all these teachers. But there's no greater time this happens than when kids are thinking about college. And I found that with kids with ADHD, sometimes they're not sure. Should I be college bound? I don't know. And sometimes parents don't always have that conversation. But I would encourage you to have it early, starting in 9th grade, even if it's a question, college, have you started thinking about that? Setting a time to discuss. I created a checklist that can help you with that. In high school, what to do at each grade level. So in 9th grade, what should freshmen do to open up the dialogue and think ahead? Their sophomore year, their junior year, and finally their senior year. It is incredibly involved applying to college, and starting that earlier truly reduces a lot of stress. So I want to thank everybody here. And by the way, if you would like that document for you, if you have a high schooler or even a middle schooler, you can get that one by texting the same number, college 5544 to that number, and email me, Ann Dolin at EC Tutoring, if you're outside of the U.S. So as we wrap up, I want to let you know we're here to help. Should you have any questions about what I've shared today, if you would like to schedule a call to discuss your child to see if we're a good match for what your student needs, happy to talk. I have 3 program managers that are specific to ADHD and executive function, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart. So if you get your phone and you hold it up to this QR code, it will take you to their calendar and you can schedule a time to chat. So thank you so much, Attitude. It was such a pleasure to speak with you today. Again, my name is Ann Dolin, and I'd be more than happy to answer your questions.
Ann, thank you so much. You gave us a lot of resources that we can take home and use this afternoon. So before we get started on the Q&A, I want to just give a quick thank you to Play Attention once more for sponsoring today's webinar and making it possible. I'll get to our survey results in just a moment, but I actually wanted to start with just a little background, if I could, on executive function. And kind of expectation setting. So we have heard at Attitude that executive function skills in children with ADHD can lag like 3 years behind their neurotypical peers without ADHD. And I find that that's helpful to remind parents that a lot of educators may not even realize that. And so their expectations may be a bit unrealistic. Do you find that to be true? And do you find that that is, illuminating to parents as you work with them?
It's so true. If you think about that, like David, 15, but really the skills of like a 12-year-old, it helps to understand, okay, why are you doing that? Why are you so struggling with that? That would have been something these are things that you should know how to do. And it's true. He should know how to do these things, all kids with ADHD. But the reality is there is a lag. And yes, same thing, 3 years. And so also helping teachers to understand it's not a problem with intention. My child wants to do well in school. Kids do, even though they may not act like they do. I really have met maybe a handful of kids in 25 years that don't want to do a good job in school. They do. They want to do a good job. They often don't have the skills or the language to communicate that.
Right. Especially for those younger students. So, okay, that's very helpful. And I will turn to the survey results I found were very interesting and also aligned really well with what you were talking about today. The most common challenge that parents cited was maintaining motivation. About 24% of people said that was their students' greatest challenge. And you talked about how the doom loop can really upend motivation, can undo it, and that positivity is a powerful tool to use. And we got one question who said, from a parent who said, that calendaring makes a lot of sense to them. They'll take a task that they think will take 30 minutes. And it actually takes 60 minutes. Then they get frustrated, they lose motivation, and they don't see the point in powering forward. So basically, are there consequences? What can we use to help those students who do end up getting frustrated, maybe by their own challenges as they encounter them?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is, realizing that maybe how you see things as a student is a little bit different than what actually is happening. I had that situation. I don't know why I remember this so vividly, but I do. My youngest son has ADHD, and when he was in 3rd grade, he had this Pueblo Indians project. And of course, he put it off, and he comes around to doing it, and he says, "Oh, this is going to take me a half hour." And it was this big poster project that it was like a total gobbler. It took many steps. And I said, "Oh, how do you figure that?" And he said, "Oh, I can, cut this out. I can do this in 10 minutes, this in 5 minutes." Well, it ended up taking him 3 hours. And I really wanted to swoop in and say, "Oh my gosh, you were so wrong. You're clearly estimating time incorrectly." But the next time I said, "Oh, so it seemed like it took longer than you thought." So the next time he had a big project that was a gobbler, I said, "Oh, based on what happened last time, how might you, what do you think is a good estimate for this?" And so sometimes it's just having the conversation with kids and reminding them of their history, not like, "Oh, I told you so," but asking the question based on what happened last time. Do you think you should allow for more time? Would that be helpful to you? Is a good conversation to have. Kids often underestimate how long it's going to take them to do something. So also giving themselves a buffer on that calendar is helpful. I also like having a timer in the area the child is doing homework. And of course, you can use the timer on your phone, but that can be inherently distracting. So you can say to your child, would a physical timer be okay, like an old-fashioned kitchen timer? Would this be helpful to you? You don't have to use it all the time. Maybe when you don't want to do something. And that timer can be really that visual that helps kids get going. So sometimes it's because they don't start on time. Sometimes it's, because they haven't allotted enough time.
Got you. Now, the number 2 most common challenge was following through. And you did talk about instead of asking your child, did you do X, Y, Z, to help them feel heard, to name their emotions and to work with them on solutions. And we did have one parent write in to say, what words would you suggest instead of did you, especially for those things like homework that's due tomorrow? You kind of have to get down to the quick of it pretty fast.
Well, you can start out when your child walks through the door. A common question we all have as parents is, do you have homework? But a better question is, what are your priorities today? And we cannot have the expectation that our child is going to rattle off, well, let's see, gee, mom, I got to do that history assignment, and then I need to do my Spanish homework, and I can't forget that essay. That's not going to happen. But it does, that question fires up kids' executive function skills. So they start thinking, out of all the things, I really want to get this done, and maybe this done. Or you can say, what is your, if you only got one thing done today that would make you feel really good, what is that one thing? And for kids that are really resistant or they're feeling overwhelmed, I love the one thing approach. It helps them boil down all this, white noise in their heads about everything that's going on into that one thing. And that really can help kids.
Okay, very helpful. And as a follow-on to that, we just received a question that I think is poignant. Can you offer any advice for helping a child articulate what kind of help they need? They may realize there's a problem, but they can't quite articulate it. And especially in high school where they're expected to advocate for themselves, this can be, a real barrier.
Kids have difficulty when they're getting to high school in one of two areas. Either they don't understand the content and it's a subject issue, like they're in Spanish and they've missed out on some of the basics. So it's just Spanish, math, math-based sciences, they're all very structural in nature, and it's like scaffolding. And so sometimes it's a subject issue where they don't get the content. Sometimes, though, it's that they're not doing well in multiple subjects because they're not able to keep on top of their work. They're turning things in late. They're getting behind. It's more of an executive function issue. Sometimes it's a little bit both, but I try to boil it down and ask, tell me the class. It's difficult. And you might see a pattern. You might see that when you talk to your child, it's really cumulative subjects that they're having difficulty in. And it's super common with kids with ADHD because I call these kids Swiss cheese students. They're sitting in class and they're kind of in and out of focus, more so now after the pandemic when focus is an issue for pretty much everybody. And they might look like they're paying attention, but they're really not. So they go home to do the work and they're not sure how to do it. And so they just slap anything down on the paper to make it look like they did it. But the reality might be that they're missing out on some foundational information. So seeing if there's a pattern with these cumulative subjects and understanding, is it subject-based or is it more executive function? Those are good questions to ask. And in that way, the student can get the appropriate help.
Okay, very helpful. The third most common challenge cited by parents today was just getting started. So you did talk about, hey, let me just set this timer for 10 or 20 minutes. I'm going to just, see if I can make myself do this. And usually it's the getting started, getting over that hump that unlocks some momentum. But we had a parent write in and say that the adrenaline or dopamine rush of procrastination is so strong with their child that they really feel like they're fighting against, Mother Nature. And wondering if you have advice for specifically those kids who seem to kick into action at the very last minute.
Yeah, it's interesting about procrastination because it's actually not a time management issue. It's an emotional regulation issue. And it's like, when you don't want to do something, can you basically talk yourself into it? Can you trick your brain into thinking that getting started isn't so bad? Now, some kids don't feel a pain point, if they've done it like this for many years and there's no ramification, like, nobody knows about it. The teacher doesn't know about it because they ultimately get the work done and they get good grades. You may or may not know about it. They don't really have a pain point. And when somebody doesn't have a pain point, they're usually down at the very bottom of that ladder of the stages of change. They don't see the reason to change. So it's super hard as a parent to make that happen. Usually something happens where it doesn't work over time. Like it might work in middle school, but not high school, or it might work in high school, but it doesn't work in college. And so often it's something that happens that the child is like, okay, I'm going to change my ways. And so they're a little bit more willing to try a different strategy to shift gears or to get help.
Okay. Now the fourth answer selected, these top four were definitely the most popular by far, was organizing time and materials. So you talked all about our bites and munchers and gobblers, how to use calendars, and how to help your student learn to prioritize. A lot of people wondering if you have any favorite either paper calendars or digital solutions that work well, specifically keeping in mind that need to plan those gobblers.
Yes. Here's the thing about it doesn't honestly, it comes down to what the child is willing to do. I've tried to fight this battle. I tried to fight the battle, to be honest, probably for 15 years and working with kids. And it was a very common complaint from parents. Oh, Jimmy won't write his assignments down. He's got to have a system. And I would try, okay, let's try this, let's try that. And the kid wouldn't do it. And so if that's been a battle, it's maybe you work on something else and come back to that later, because there will eventually be a pain point. But for many kids, thinking about what is the best way to keep track, it usually is a digital calendar, because much of the software now will populate the assignments onto the calendar. So like if you have a digital arts project due on Friday and a teacher assigns it through the software, it will show up on your calendar due on Friday. The problem is that's all it says. It doesn't say, oh, okay, let's break this down for you. And why don't you do this on Monday, this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday? So really that's where the student needs help, is taking that and breaking it down. And there's no better place to do that. If it's already on your calendar, then you should do it on the digital piece. And so we often try to get kids to do things that we want or that have been successful for us. But I might, try a different way. But generally for older kids, it is the digital way that tends to be best.
Okay. Yes. And it's what works is what works. Okay. So taking a step back, we have a question from a parent who says that their high school student is just burned out on their parents trying to help them use a planner. And they seem to be really stuck in that pre-contemplative stage. It's clear to everyone else that they need to be using a planner, but they're really stuck. Any ideas on how to jostle them up the ladder?
I think this is from a parent, so it could be that the only strategy you've tried is working, with the child yourself. So if that's the case, I might bring in somebody else to see if that makes a difference. But again, if the student doesn't have a pain point, it's a hard battle to fight. And it might be that, they're not going to keep a calendar, but maybe they'll do something with a whiteboard. I found a lot of success with whiteboards. It's not as powerful as putting everything on a calendar, but it's still a visual. And I think visuals are great. It could be that they have it in their study area and they just jot down their assignments that they have to do. Many kids like this approach because they like crossing it off. It gives them that little dopamine hit and they feel good. So I maybe suggest two things. Maybe somebody else is better in this situation. And perhaps, going down the same avenue again as, in my situation, I tried that for many years with kids and it wasn't successful. So I had to switch gears and figure out what they're willing to do. It might be they're willing to do something else. And they may take that direction better from somebody else as well.
Yes, shocking that our kids might accept
might
accept advice and counsel. I can say that as the parent of a high school student that sometimes it's just coming from another parental figure makes a difference. I'm going to squeeze in one last question, and that is, given your experience as a public school educator, a couple of parents wondering if you can advise them on advice for working with educators to help them understand exactly that point we made earlier about executive function not being a lack of wanting to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I actually do training for teachers, and you would think that everybody would know what executive functions are, how they manifest themselves in kids, what happens with ADHD kids in the classroom, but they really don't. And so, certainly you can provide an article that you found to be helpful and say, oh, I found this to be helpful. I wanted to pass it along. I'm not sure if it would be helpful to you or not. So you're not saying like, you should read this, which kind of puts teachers on the defensive. You're saying, hey, it could go either way. Let me know if it's helpful. But I also still want to go back to those words I've noticed, because if you can name the behavior, I've noticed Jimmy really, really wants to get this done. He's having such a hard time breaking it down or prioritizing. Do you have any strategies? I think this might be related to his ADHD. So you're observing the behavior. You're not saying you need to teach this or why haven't you gone over this in class? You're just noticing something. And as a teacher, when I had parents take that approach with me, I just felt like I really wanted to be on their side and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. But when teachers who are so overwhelmed now feel like it's a little bit defensive, they may not be as invested.
I love that advice. And I think that's a wonderful place to end today's session. And thank you so much. You've contributed so much insight and so many resources to our community today. Thank you for another wonderful webinar, and make sure you don't miss any future webinars or articles by signing up for our free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 439 to access the slides, webinar replay, certificate of attendance, and the transcript. If you support the work we're doing to support the ADHD community, we encourage you to subscribe to Attitude Magazine at attitudemag.com/subscribe. And thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
You love podcasts, the stories, the laughs, the unexpected turns. But when this episode ends, the silence starts. Not anymore. Audiobooks.com turns that silence into your next great adventure. With over 450,000 titles, from bestsellers to hidden gems, your love for listening just found its new best friend. And because you already know the joy of audio, we're giving you 3 free audiobooks to start your journey. Imagine your favorite podcast, now with unlimited episodes. That's audiobooks.com. Keep the story going. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. Because for podcast lovers like you, the end of an episode is just the beginning. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.